In this video, I'm going to be introducing logical operators and if statements. So first off, we're going to start off with if x is equal to 7, then we print out x is equal to 7. So let's actually declare the variable x, and let's set x equal to 5 in this case. Well, since x is equal to 5, what do you think is going to happen? Well, x is equal to 5. And is 5 equal to 7? No, it's not. So when we run this program, it does not activate the if statement. If we want to run something no matter what, we can write down else. So if x is not equal to 7 in this case, you're going to run this else statement, and we write down x is not equal to 7. So if we run this program, now we print out x is not equal to 7. So in the case that this if statement does not turn on, this else statement turns on instead. Now, what if x is equal to 7? Well, if x is equal to 7, then we activate this if statement, and all the code ran here will work, right? We can also print out, I don't know, goo goo gaga down here. All right, and goo goo gaga will print out as well. Basically, all the code underneath that is indented, this if statement right here, will run. Right, keep in mind, it has to be indented. If we write down if we subtract it, you're going to get an error, right? The indentation matters in Python. And also, this else statement will just be completely ignored. Notice how we did not print out x is not equal to 7. So basically, if you meet this condition right here, else won't run. If you don't meet this condition, else will run. Now, here's the thing that I would like to point out about this. The double equal sign. The double equal sign is absolutely necessary, because a single equal sign will give you an error. The reason why is because a single equal sign is specifically used for variable assignment. Right? Of course, you don't want any confusion. When people created Python, they didn't want any confusion, so they set a double equal sign for conditions. Keep that in mind. You need the double equal sign if you want the condition. So an if statement is plain English, right? If x is equal to 7, print this. Right? In Python, plain English is basically what you're going to see a lot. It's actually pretty nice because it's very easy to remember the syntax, and you know exactly what each part is doing a lot of the times, especially even for beginners. But let's actually make this a little more user-friendly. Let's write down input, typecast the answer of input to an integer, type in a number. So what are we doing here? Well, in the previous couple videos, I talked about the input built-in function and the integer built-in function. And whenever you type in anything into the input, so if we run this, you can ask for user input in the terminal, and we can write whatever we want here. So input always returns a string, and we have to turn that string into an integer if we want to compare it to the number 7. Right? So type in a number, let's say 8. All right, 8 is not equal to, x is not equal to 7 in this case, since x is stored as the input here. Now, what if we put down a string? I'll actually undo this. I'll bring back the input. But what if we put down a string here? So if we put down a string, set x equal to string, what happens? Well, in this case, since the string is not equal to 7, we print out x is not equal to 7. Now, what if we set a string 7, right? What if we write down string 7? If the string 7 is equal to the integer 7, what do you think is going to happen? Well, x is not equal to 7 in this case. And the reason why is because strings can never equal integers. The only way you can, make this possible is if you typecast, or if you turn x into an integer. Now x equals 7, and we print goo goo gaga. But let's go ahead and undo this and bring back the user input and typecast it to an integer. Let's show you a couple more features of this. Let's go ahead and test out the greater than symbol. So right here, before we talked about equals, now we can write down greater than. So in this case, if x is greater than 7, then you print out this right here, x is greater than 7. And else, x is not greater than 7. X is not greater than 7. So let's go ahead and type in input. In this case, what if we write down 7? Since 7 is not greater than 7, then we printed out this else statement, x is not greater than 7, right? Let's type in another number, 9. If we type in 9, x is greater than 7. Therefore, goo goo gaga. All right, we're good. How about if we, let's end this code, let's end the program, put down greater than or equal to. Well, in this case, now if we write down 7, x is greater than 7. Okay, let's write greater than or equal to 7. If we change the sentence to make it make sense, equal to 7. So if we run this again, 7, right, x is greater than or equal to 7, and print goo goo gaga as well. So this is how you write down greater than or equal to. You can also write down less than or equal to in this case. Less than or equal to, not less than 7, right? So in this case, we can write down less than or equal to 7, and we can write down, let's say, 3, right? 3 is less than or equal to 7. Makes sense, correct? I write down 7, right? So x is less than or equal to 7. In this case, our input, 7, is equal to x, correct? And we write down less than. So these things are very easy to understand, and honestly, the logical understanding of this takes time, especially since a lot of things, maybe like the 5 things are going on at the same time. You haven't built up an intuition for code yet. It just requires practice. The more you use if statements, of course, the more you do projects even, the better you'll get at this. I highly recommend you do projects. I'm probably going to make videos on projects as well. Like maybe like a, I don't know, a hangman project or a dice game project. Okay, I'll probably do that for you guys, so to teach you how to use for loops, while loops, if statements, all of that all together. But let's go ahead and talk about the conditionals. So let's write down and. Let's clear out this. Let's write down if x is less than, let's say if x is less than 100 and x is greater than 50. Print out x is between 50 and 100, right? If x is less than 100 and greater than 50, x is between 50 and 100, correct? Else, print como estas. All right, let's run this. Type in a number. Let's type in a number between 100 and 50. Let's type in 55. X is between 50 and 100. So here's the thing about these conditionals, these logical operators. You can write down and it's, again, plain old English. If x is less than 100 and greater than 50, you have plain old English. Another way to write this is writing down 50 less than x. So basically right here, this is something you would probably see in your arithmetic class when you're learning about less than and greater than symbols, right? But this also works, of course. You can do this. So we write down 10. You can print como está, since 10 is not in the range of 50 and 100. Now here's the thing about this. I know in C and C++ this won't work. All right, but in Python this works. So keep in mind, in different coding languages, this might not work. Right, this statement might not work. But let's not worry too much about that. Let's go ahead and talk about the OR statement. OR. So let's write down x is equal to 100 or x is equal to 50. X is 50 or 100. Right? So now we have another logical operator. Before we had and, plain old English. Now we have OR. Again, English, right? If x is equal to 100 or x is equal to 50, print x is 50 or 100. So let's go ahead and test that out. Let's type in 50, right? X is 50 or 100. We type in something else, like 65. Print out como está, since x is not equal to 50 or 100. So the thing about this OR statement is, if either of these conditions are met, then we run the code below here. Doesn't matter which one, just one of them works. We can also write down or multiple times. Or x is equal to 67. Or x is equal to 200. Or x is equal to 420. Right? And instead of writing all that down, I'll just write down yes. Okay. So in this case, you can chain these ors. You can just constantly write down or. And if I write down 67, it's gonna print out yes. If I write down 200, again, it's gonna print out yes. If I write down anything other than these numbers, like 64, it's gonna print out como está, since that's in the else statement. So keep in mind, we can just keep writing down or, and you can actually do the same thing with and statements. You can just keep writing down and, so that you have to meet all the conditions rather than just one of them. In comparison to the or statement right here. So we covered and we covered or. There's one more logical operator I'd like to talk about, and it's the not. So if x is not equals to 100, print out no. else print out yes. So right here, we run this code, type in a number. If x is not equal to 100, we print out no. So in this case, let's write down 4. Since 4 is not equal to 100, we print it out no. So we can write down not in this exclamation form as well. Another way you can also write this is simply by removing the exclamation mark, putting the condition in parentheses, and just putting not on the outside. Technically, the previous exclamation mark form I showed you with the exclamation mark equal sign is logically equivalent to just putting the equal sign and then a not in the outside of a parenthesis. Now, here's the thing I would like to iterate, or highlight before I move on to future topics or more things, is that if statements aren't only restricted to integers. You can also compare strings. So print you wrote down hello, else print you are a bum. Alright, so if I write down, type in a number, okay, let's not type in a number, let's say type in something, right, for our input. If x, or our input, is equal to the string hello, we're going to print down you wrote down hello. So if we write down hello here, right, technically our input was hello. Since the string hello, or our input, is equal to this condition, right, we just run the code down the if statement. Now if we write a string that's something else, like My Little Pony, it's going to print down the else statement, right? You are a bum. So keep in mind, these if statements aren't only specific to strings, or they aren't only specific to integers. You can do them with strings as well, and you can use if statements with integers, floats and booleans. I just wanted to show you that before I moved on. But another thing I'd like to talk about, maybe you guys didn't know this, is that there's an else if statement. So if, let's put this back to an integer. So x is equal to 10, we'll print out 10. And else if x is equal to 20, we'll print out 20. So you can actually write down else if, right? So else if is just another way of saying if you don't meet this condition, we move on to the next if statement condition. So if we write down, let's say 10 in this case, we'll print out 10, right? Since x is equal to 10. But if we write down 20, then we'll print out 20, since that is what's going to happen if x is equal to 20 in this else if statement. So else if is just another way of you putting down another condition for you to run another function. So in this case, if you want to run two different things, if you don't want to write down or x is equal to 20 in this case, right? And then have it print out the same thing, you can separate the if statements. The thing about this else if is that it has a little bit of a limitation. And this limitation is due to the order in which the computer reads the if statement. So for example, if we write down or x is equal to 20, like I did before, technically 20 and 20 here are the same condition, right? But if we write down 20 into the input, what's going to happen? It's going to print out 10. And the reason why it prints out 10 is because when the computer reads the if statements and the else if statements and the else statements, it reads the if statement first. And if you meet the condition for the if statement at the top, at the very top, then it ignores every other conditional below. All of these things in this chain are completely removed. We don't care about that anymore, all right? So, for example, in this case, although x is equal to 20 down here, x is also equal to 20 up here. So instead of running this code down here, the computer runs this code and ignores everything below this due to the fact that we met the condition up here first. So it completely ends the if chain. So keep in mind the order in which you write these if statements matter, all right? And another way that this can mess you up is in the case if you're like, let's say if you're trying to do x is less than 50, and x is x is less than 30. How about that? In this case, we'll print out 30. And in the uppercase, we'll print out 50. Technically, if we type down, let's say, some number below 50, let's say 45, the computer is going to look at the conditional. Since our input will be equal to x is less than 50. Is it? Yes, it is. So we'll print out 50, since x is less than 50 and our input was less than 50. Now, what if we write down something that is less than 30? So what if we write down 1? If we write down 1, technically 1 is less than 50. Since 1 is less than 50, we're going to print out 50. So the thing about this is, although 1 is less than 30 in this case, although 1 is less than 30, what the computer checks is the first if statement. And then since you wrote down 1, it checks, is 1 less than 50? And since 1 is less than 50, it ignores everything else. And then you run this code down here in this if statement. So we can actually keep writing down else if chains. X is less than 20. Print out 20. Forgot the colon. And you can write down as many else ifs as you want. And you can also put an else if you want. It's optional if you want to put the else at the end. Right? But keep in mind, the order in which you write these else if statements matter. So if your intention was to print out 50 anytime your number was less than 50, and anytime your number is less than 30, you want to print out 30, right? You need to change the order of this. You need to write down 30 first and 50 first. So first, if we write down, let's say, if we write down 1, now we print out 30. And the reason why is because we checked this condition first, right? The computer checked this condition first. Since our input was 1, x is equal to 1, and since 1 is less than 30, we print out 30, right? And then now if we write down a number, let's say 45, that is greater than 30, but less than 50 still, we print out 50, as intended. So first, remember, computer checks this 45. Is 45 less than 50? Is 45 less than 30? It is not. So we skip this guy. We move on to the next else if statement. 45 is less than 50. Therefore, anything past this else if statement is completely gone. Computer doesn't care about it anymore. And then we print and then we run the code below this else if statement. All right. So keep in mind the order in which you write your else if statements matter. This can mess up a lot of beginner coders, okay? Because you know, you're not really you don't have the intuition for that step, the super step-by-step process. It's like I don't know, have you guys ever seen that video of that kid that got super frustrated because the dad was telling him, tell me how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, and the kid told the dad, okay, pick up the knife, and the guy picked it up from the blade side. All right, that's the same for computers, right? Computers, you need to be very, very exact with your directions. If you tell it to pick up the knife to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, then you have to tell it where to pick up the knife from and with what hand. You know, the dad could have picked it up with his foot, right? So you need to tell the computer these very specific directions. It's like teaching a toddler how to do something, basically. Talk to it as clear and exact as possible. That's actually the good thing about programming. It teaches you how to be very clear, you know, with your instructions. That's enough talk about if statements themselves. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside of an if statement. So let's go ahead and print out your condition. If x is equal to 10. And let's set x equal to 10 in this case. So the variable x is equal to 10, and we can print out your condition for the if statement. So remember, if you have an if, you can set x equal to 10, put a colon, and print out x is equal to 10 in this case, correct? Let's comment this out for now. Let's print out this. So in this case, x equal to 10, but we're printing out now your condition. What you're writing down in the condition of your if statement. And it actually prints out the Boolean true. So here's the thing about this. If, let's set a variable y, and then print out y is true. Okay, and then let's assign a variable, let's assign true to y, the Boolean true to y. This makes sense. Why does this make sense? You don't have a condition, you don't have an equal sign, you don't have a less than sign, right? You don't have a strings equal to this. You simply have if y. What does this mean? Well, let's comment this out for now as well. We'll get back to this later. But if y and y is equal to true in this case, print out y is equal to true. Right? So if y, what is y in this case? y is true. So basically what you're saying is, if true, print out y is true. So in this case, we print out y is true. Now what happens if we set y to false? If we set y to false, then nothing happens, because we write down if false, therefore we don't run this part of the code. So if true, right, the variable y is true, the Boolean true is telling you to do this. So technically, on a foundational level, what this actually is, let's actually remove this comment. What this is, right here, this condition right here, is simply if x is equal to 10. So this x is equal to 10, remember we printed out. X is equal to 10 is true. The Boolean true. This condition is true since x is equal to 10. So right here, we're actually saying if true, print x is equal to 10. So technically, these conditionals all run on Booleans, true or false statements. Another example of this could be, let's actually show you how NOT gates work now, or the NOT logical operator. If we put NOT here, if x is not 10, what do you think is going to happen? Actually, let's make a more simplified example of this. Set x equal to true, and we print out x. We're expecting true, right? Makes sense. Now, what if we put down not in front of x? If we put down not in front of this x, it turns the true into a false. Now, what if x is false? For the not turns false into true. So what does not do? Not actually flips the Boolean symbol, right? So if a variable in front of not is false, then it turns this entire thing to true, right? What we're printing right now is true. But if the variable in front of not is true, then we print out false, since not actually flips the Boolean, okay? So what if statements actually do is use true or use Booleans, right? So if we write down if true, print, let's actually write down if x, print x is true, right? In this case, since x is equal to true, we're actually going to print this. So conditionals run on Booleans. It just turns everything into a Boolean. So let's go ahead and print out this again. So let's print out, let's use it to show you another example. If x is greater than 10, and let's write down 100 here. X is 100. And let's write down if x is greater than 10 in this condition here. Let's comp this out for now. So what is this? X is 100, and since 100 is greater than 10, what do you expect? This entire conditional right here turns into the Boolean true. So the conditionals in front of the if statements, these conditions right here in front of the if statements, turn to Booleans. They turn to Booleans, and as a result, your if statement runs off of that, right? And that's the same for your or statements and statements as well. So let's go write down true and true. So we write down true and true, right? What are we going to actually happen? It's going to print out true. Now, what if we write down false? And this is actually analogous to the case. And x is less than 5. So x is greater than 100 in this case. And let's put down yes king. So in this case, x equal to 100. What would happen if we run this condition, this if statement? Well, x is greater than 100. Sorry, x is equal to 100, which is greater than 10. So this conditional turns into true. X is equal to 100, which is less. Is it less than 5? It is not. So this conditional turns to false. Now look what happens if we put the and here. If we put the and, we actually get false. So the thing about and is that, what if we have two falses? Right? False and false. So if we have false and false, we get false. The only time and is true is if both the conditionals turn to true. So in this case, if true and false, so let's actually undo everything I just did. Undo. So in this case, this turned to true. And in this case, this turned to false, right? So if we put the and in between it, this and, what we showed here, right? when we printed true and false, turned this entire thing to false. We actually only printed out false, correct? Right? If we run this again, we print out false. So technically, true and false turns into false. So this entire thing turns into false. So technically, if we run this conditional right here, nothing is going to happen. Right? We won't print out yes king because false doesn't run. Let's turn this back to the conditions. If I were to run this without that, all that stuff, remove this, what are you going to expect? Nothing's going to happen, right? And if we set an else statement, of course, right, in the case that none of the conditionals above work, just print down no. So in this case, no is going to print. And the reason why is because, remember, if x is greater than 10 and less than 5, print yes king. But there's absolutely no way you can have a number that's greater than 10 and less than 5 at the exact same time, right? That just can't happen. Now, what if you wanted to put or instead? So let's actually print out or. Let's test out this or. So print out true or false. So if we print out true or false, what's going to happen? If we print out true or false, it actually ends up being true. So compared to if we put and here, this and compares the Booleans on the left and right. And then if either of them are false, then the entire thing is false for and. But for or, if either of them are true, then this entire thing turns into true. So what we're actually printing out here will be true. If we put true or true, we actually get true. If we get true, if we get false or false, how about let's put false or false? That is the only time when or will turn into false, which is false in this case. So the thing about the or and the ands is that they actually just combine two Booleans into one, right? So let's go ahead and test this out. And let's actually explain what's going on in this statement right here. So x is 100 in this case. Since x is equal to 100 and x is greater than 10, x is greater than 10, that's right, x is equal to 100, therefore x is greater than 10, this conditional turns to true, remember? If we print out, I'll actually show you again, x is greater than 10, right, and then print out x is less than 5, right? What's going to happen? Let's turn this back to x is greater than 10. What's going to happen? We're going to print down true and false, correct? First print statement is true, which means that x is greater than 10. And the second print statement is false, which means x is less than 5. Which means x is not less than 5, right? 100 is clearly not less than 5. So what actually happens is this x greater than 10 turns to true, right? Hence the print statement. And this x is less than 5 turns to false. So we have this true or false again. And remember what happens when we print out true or false, right? If we put two Booleans, true or false, if either of them are true, this entire thing combined turns to true. Therefore, we run this if statement. If true, print yes king, which means if anything is true, you run it, right? If false, you don't run it, right? You just run the else statement in this case. You don't run this if, you just run the else. That's why you printed out no here. So the thing about these ands and ors and nots is that all of them are tied to Booleans, and all of these conditions just turn to Booleans. This x is greater than 10 simply turns into a Boolean. This x is less than 5 simply turns into a Boolean. So what I have here is just the last example of this very long video. So right here is an example of what you will actually use if statements for in actual programs, for large scale programs. So most of the time you're going to have a function, and this function is going to do something a little more complicated than testing if a number is even or not. But what it does is take an input, in this case the input was x, and then return true or false based on if the number is odd or even. So right here, if you don't know, it's modulo. All it does is return the remainder. So if num was 5 in this case, and you divide 5 by 2, the remainder would be 1. And since 1 is not equal to 0, right, you skip this if statement, and then you return false. So actually, we don't even need the else here. We don't even need the else here. We can literally just remove the else and put return false here if we wanted to. But that doesn't make a difference. The program will still operate the same. I'll show you an example of what this does. Type a number 8, right? 8 is even. So what it does is return true into the original function. And down here, we have another if statement that has the function within here, right? And there's no conditionals, there's no equal, there's no less than, there's no greater than, there's none of that, right? There's no and, or. It's just if and then the function name. Here's the thing about this function. The function takes in the input x, which is our typed in input using the input function, and then runs it through this guy right here. And again, what this guy does is return true if the number is even, and return false if the number is odd. All right. And then since it returns true, remember, when you return a value to a function, technically the original call of the function turns into true. So in this case, if we wrote down an even number, this entire function would return true, which means that this entire guy, this function, is equivalent to true. So we would write down, we could simply think of it as replacing it with true. If what we wrote down in the input is odd, right, then we write down 11 in this case. Then we'd return false in the is even function. And since this guy turns to false, we skip the if statement and we just run the else statement. But this is just an example, a very simplified example of what you're going to be doing with these if statements and using functions inside the if statements as the conditions. Because what you're going to use return a lot, and you're going to use this thing a lot, right? Especially if you use more. Of course, this will be a more complicated function rather than is even. I think I already said that. But really, this is an example of what a larger scale project program would look like and how you use conditionals. I just wanted to give that background to you guys. But as always, if you have any questions, put it in the comment section. And if you found this video helpful, consider grabbing a like in the video. Thanks for watching.